Your research activity is really preparation for the lit review of an article or an essay. That paragraph at the beginning, which they talked about in the the YouTube video you just saw. The lit review says, what have other scholars said about this? What is the conversation that has already happened on this topic? Because that's all scholarship is. It's a conversation. It starts out when Jane says something and it's followed up by Billy and Kate, and now you're entering the conversation. You're going to say, yes, I acknowledge you have all said these things, and I agree or disagree, and I have this to add to what you have already noticed. So, in order to say that, you have to know where the gap in the scholarship is. You need to know you have said A, B, and C. What is D? What is that point that hasn't been referenced yet? And the most helpful for that is looking at questions that reveal the gap. So for example, in the research you're looking at, does somebody mention what needs to happen next? Christina Bakalega at the end of her book said the next step is, and she listed out the things that hadn't been done yet. She's already identified the gap for you. So look and see if your author has a place where they've said, I've done this, but what hasn't been done is this. Then think about the texts that are referenced here. Perhaps they're saying this about fairy tales written by men, and you're looking at fairy tales written by women. And so you would say, they've identified X, Y, and Z about the treatment of gender in fairy tales written by men like the Brothers Grimm, but they haven't looked at X, Y, and Z in fairy tales written by women. And so that gap, the gender of the author, is what you're looking at. It's kind of like Where's Waldo? Except instead of trying to find where Waldo is, you have to find where Waldo isn't. And once you find that gap, you know what you want to fill with your own close reading. So that will lead to activity 2. Mind the gap. What is the main point of the article? What do they say? And then 2, what are the gaps? What haven't they said and haven't said in relation to your research? So for example, I found an article on game theory, but it dealt with game theory in video games. And I was looking at game theory in 19th century literary magazines. And so I would say this article deals with it in video games, but what we haven't looked at is the way game theory can be approached in the games written in literary magazines for children in the 1800s. So it's not that the article missed it or failed, it wasn't about that. But that's a place where the conversation hasn't gone. Nobody's been talking about game theory in 19th century literary magazines. So what is the main point, and then what is the gaps? What are not covered? That is going to be leading you up to your research presentation.